Generative AI is everywhere, but how can you use it to build trust and loyalty in your customer communications? Hi, I'm Shawn Henry.
And I'm Milan Kaur.
We're going to show you with new capabilities from Azure Communication Services and Azure AI. But first, Milan, can you tell us a little bit about Azure Communication Services?
Sure. Azure Communication Services is an intelligent communication platform that is built using the same infrastructure that delivers Microsoft Teams to 300 million active users globally. And it's built on top of one of the most secure clouds, Azure. Azure Communication Services provides APIs for developers to add the same rich communication capabilities like voice, video, telephony, SMS, and email to their solutions across different platforms. And all these capabilities are available as pro-code APIs in C#, JavaScript, Java, or Python, as well as through our low-code offerings for our citizen developers. We have a variety of connectors that you can use in Azure Logic Apps or Microsoft Power Platform to start building communication-rich apps without writing a single line of code. That's right. For example, if you want to add sending bulk email capabilities from your low-code app, all you have to do is go to the Azure portal, create a communication resource, get a domain configured, and then copy these details over to our send email connector, and that's it. You can start sending emails. Similarly, for sending SMS, you would need to go to the Azure portal, configure a phone number, and then copy those details over to send SMS connector. That's all. You can start sending SMS. So it's that easy. In addition to our connectors, we also have a chat component for Power Apps component framework. This chat PCF component is basically a drag and drop UI element that you can add in your apps for adding the chat capabilities.
So that's a great high-level overview of Azure Communication Services. And what it does is it allows you to take your application and connect it to Azure Communication Services so that you can interact with your customers through our communication channels, whether that's voice or voice over IP or video, SMS, chat, or email. And then connect your customers either to conversational AI, to your virtual agents, or to real people through live agent interactions and connections through Azure Communication Services. As Milan mentioned, all this is available through either pro-code APIs with Azure SDKs or through Power Platform or Azure Logic Apps for low-code interactions. From there, let's take a look at some of the new capabilities we're adding this year at Ignite to enable even richer business-to-customer communications and to add intelligence to all of those communications.
We have an exciting list of announcements for you this Ignite. Last month, we released Azure Communication Services Advanced Messaging SDK for the WhatsApp Business Platform. Now in preview, Azure Communication Services supports sending and receiving messages between the WhatsApp Business Platform and Azure. So if you have a WhatsApp business account, you can connect it to Azure and start having conversations with your customers that use WhatsApp. Furthermore, to effectively route incoming customer inquiries, we are announcing general availability of Azure Communication Services Job Router. Job Router enables you to direct incoming customer requests to the best suited agent or service. Using a mix of predefined and dynamic runtime rules, it ensures optimal routing for increased customer satisfaction and operational efficiency. You can think of it as a rule-based digital traffic controller for all communications. Next up, we have Azure AI speech integration into Azure Communication Services call automation workflows in general availability. It enables AI-assisted experiences for customers calling into a business. This allows you to connect your calling services like interactive voice responses directly to Azure text-to-speech and speech-to-text capabilities. So instead of traditional IVR system with rigid paths like press 1 to get tech support, press 2 to get to sales, you can now build conversational voice response systems by leveraging this feature. So you can connect your Azure Cognitive Service resource with Azure Communication Services and start using the speech conversation capabilities from within your solution. Additionally, you can specify the voice type or connect a custom voice or speech model that is trained on your industry-specific data. With that, we are through the amazing list of announcements for this season.
So those are a bunch of great capabilities that add on top of existing Azure Communication Services. To recap, we've added advanced messaging through WhatsApp as our first channel, as another channel to allow your users to connect to your applications through Azure Communication Services. We've added connectivity into Azure AI services for text-to-speech and speech-to-text. We've added Job Router, which allows you to intelligently route your calls to the right person with the right capabilities within your organization. And finally, with Azure OpenAI, you can connect all of your applications to advanced large language models and generative AI like ChatGPT. With all these capabilities, Azure Communication Services and Azure AI allows you to build hyper-personalized communications through all the different channels that we enable, faster, scalable, and compliant responses that are built on top of the same infrastructure that we use at Microsoft to power Teams, and better operational efficiency by only paying for the capabilities and resources that you need through Azure.
That sounds wonderful, Shawn. Can we see all of this in action in real time?
Yeah, I have a great demo I've been thinking of, and I'm really excited to show it. I'm sure everyone's familiar with whenever you go to a physician's office, you have to fill out an intake form. This is where you have your name and your date of birth and your previous medical history. These forms can be kind of tedious and long to fill out. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could use large language models like ChatGPT and Azure Communication Services to have a service actually call you and help you fill out the form in an intelligent way? So here's how I was envisioning this application could work. It would be a very simple form, and you could upload your form to it, which is either like a PDF or an image file. And then we would analyze it using Azure Document Intelligence, and then take the output of that and feed it into a large language model, and then use Azure Communication Services to call you and have a live conversation with that form. And in this way, you could actually walk through the form with the large language model, all while talking to it.
And I think one could also imagine using this for all types of forms, right? Not just medical intake forms. I'm thinking insurance forms or school admission forms or even restaurant menus.
Yeah, one of the advantages of using a large language model is you really don't have to change much other than the prompt, and it can use all sorts of different data types. Let's take a look at how something like this would be made. In Azure Portal, I've created 3 resources. I've created an Azure OpenAI resource, which will host our large language model, in this case, ChatGPT. I've created an Azure AI resource, which will host our text-to-speech and speech-to-text capabilities, as well as Azure Forms Recognizer, which is Azure Document Intelligence. And then finally, I've created an Azure Communication resource, which will connect all of these things to our communication resources and allow me to actually talk to the large language model over the phone. So the first thing we'll need to do is we'll need to get a phone number and attach it to our Azure Communication Services. To do this, I'll click on the Azure Communication Service and I'll click on phone numbers. Now, if I wanted to, I could use one of our free trial numbers, which would allow me for 30 days to use a trial number that I could connect to a verified phone number like my personal phone number. But in this case, I'm actually going to go through and purchase a regular phone number, and I'll show you what that looks like. So if I click on purchase a phone number, it will give me the options of selecting the country I want. You can see all the countries that we enable through Azure Communication Services. And then it'll ask me what I want to do with this phone number, either use it with a person or with an application. I'll then select all the capabilities that I want. In this case, I want it to be both a voice number and an SMS number, and I'll search for a phone number. Once this returns, I can select that phone number that I like, and I can attach it to my Azure Communication resource.
So far, Shawn, you have created an Azure Communication resource and connected it with a phone number. And then I see you created an Azure AI speech resource for the speech translation stuff. And then you also have created an Azure OpenAI resource for GPT-powered capabilities. Is that right?
Yeah. And so the next thing that we'll do is we'll connect all those resources together. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll go back to our Azure Communication resource and we'll connect it to the Azure AI resource. So clicking on Azure Communication Services, we can see on the list over here on the left where it says Cognitive Services. And we'll click on that to do the connection. In this case, I haven't yet enabled managed identity on my service, so I'll go and do that. And this will then enable the ability for us to connect those 2 services in the back end and share credentials with each other. Going back into Cognitive Services, it's now pre-selected the resource that's in the same resource group as me, and I can just click connect. And just like that, Azure Communication Services and Azure AI Services are connected, and I can call one from the other. Final configuration we need to do is to go into OpenAI and create a deployment. This is done through Azure OpenAI Studio, which is a similar experience to Portal, but a little bit different. From here, I can select what model I want to use. In this case, I'm going to use GPT-3.5 with the 16K windows. This is a larger window, which will work better for some of the longer conversations that we might have with this application. I'll give it a name, and that's it. I've now configured all the resources I need. So back on our portal page, we will collect all the keys and endpoints we need. So we need the connection string and the endpoint for Azure Communication Services. We need the same thing from our Azure AI resource. We need the key and endpoint for Azure AI, and then the same thing again for Azure OpenAI. So we'll take all those and we'll copy them over later to use in our configuration file. The last two things we'll need is the phone number that we acquired earlier, and then the name of that deployment that we created in Azure OpenAI. So now we get to the fun part where we get to actually write some code. I've created an Azure ASP.NET Core application here, and the basic template will create a simple web service with a hello world endpoint that I can now connect to like a web service. Once we've done this, let's go ahead and add some of the dependencies that we need to add. These are all the dependencies, the SDKs that support those resources that we just connected together in Azure Portal. So the first one we need is Azure AI Forms Recognizer. And then we'll also add Azure OpenAI. And finally, Azure Communication Services Call Automation. Call Automation is what we're using in order to interact with a regular PSTN phone line. Those last two, you'll notice I added the pre-release tag. And that's because as of the time of filming this, both those SDKs are still in pre-release. Okay, now I'll create a folder for us to host the index file, which is the form that we showed earlier for our web application. So I'll create a www root directory, and I'll add to it a file called index.html, and I'll copy and paste into there the contents of our HTML and JavaScript file for our front end. So that's the form that we're going to use to process the intake form and call the phone number. So this is a fairly simple HTML document that calls two APIs in our backend. One, generate prompt in order to generate our large language model prompt, and two, one called call, which will actually call out to our phone number. Now that we've done that, let's stub out those two endpoints in our backend service. We'll copy paste in the HTML and JavaScript for the form that we just showed. This is a fairly simple form in that it has some basic HTML, and then it calls two endpoints on our backend. One is generate prompt, and the other is call, which will actually call into our phone number. Back over in our code, we'll make sure that we can host the index.html file. So we'll add the use static files and use default files to our app. And now we can host this front end and it can call into our back end. But we need to implement those two API endpoints on our back end. And we can do this by getting rid of the hello world endpoint, which we don't need anymore. And we'll add that generate prompt endpoint and the call endpoint. Let's go ahead and implement the generate prompt endpoint. So this is taking a file that we uploaded in. You saw that in the demo I showed earlier. And then we'll create a file stream out of that, and we'll pass it into our document analysis client, which is created with some of those keys that we grabbed earlier from the portal. Once we've set up our document analysis client, we'll pass in that stream, and it will analyze either the picture or the PDF, and it'll give us back a string version of that PDF or that image. Once we get a string version of all the content in that form, we will prepend our prompt to it, telling the large language model exactly what we want to do. So in this case, we're asking it to help us fill out the form, to act as a receptionist at a health clinic, to be friendly and concise. And I give it a couple of examples of how to walk me through this form. And then we'll return that prompt back to our front end application.
So Shawn, this generate prompt function is basically taking a system prompt where you have mentioned that it has to act as a receptionist. And then it takes the input from the form that you uploaded and create a prompt for our OpenAI model.
That's right. In fact, we can actually try it out now. So I'll hit F5 and we'll run it. So our website is launched here, and I can select a file. I have an image of that form I showed earlier. And we'll analyze it. So this is passing it up to Azure Document Intelligence, and then it returns that prompt that I showed earlier, as well as what it thinks is in the form. So it's got all of the keys and all the field names that are in that form. And then we can now create a prompt that we can pass later to our large language model. All right, now let's go and tackle the outbound call. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create two objects. One is our call automation client, and the other is our dictionary of chats. So if multiple people are calling into our service, we can handle them. We'll create an ID for those chats, and then we can go and access that later at different points in the call state. Both these I'll create a singleton so we can access them anywhere in the application. And once I've done that, let's go ahead and create our call endpoint. So when the front end calls the back end, it's going to pass to us the prompt that we had before and the phone number. So I'll create a new object that allows us to pull that information out of the prompt when our front end calls our back end. So here I'm getting the phone number and the prompt. And if I get good data coming in from that call to our back end, I'll then use that to create a call invite object. And the call invite object has the outbound phone number, which we got from our form at the front end, and the number that we got earlier from Azure Communication Services. So that was the 1-800 number that we got earlier. So we create that call invite. We'll create a new conversation. We're giving it a GUID here as an ID. And then we'll add that prompt as the first message, the system prompt, like you said, Milan, in that message. So we created all our data structures now. And so now we'll actually create the call that will talk to our call automation client within Azure Communication Services and make that outbound call. So let's give that a try. I'll hit F5 to launch it.
And is this where the Azure AI service resource that you created comes into picture?
Not yet. We haven't actually used the Azure resource. All this is doing is actually making an outbound voice call. So when we actually run it here, we'll get the same form will come up as before, and we can go and analyze our same image as before. This will run it through Document Analyzer. We'll get the same results as before. But this time, we've implemented that call handler. So I will go and input a phone number here in this field, and we'll have it call me. So I put in the phone number. I'm clicking on Call Me, and now I can hear my phone ringing, but nothing happens. And that's because, like you said, Milan, I still haven't hooked up Azure AI services or any of our voice recognition capabilities into our app. So let's go and do that now. So I mentioned that we saw that we had those callbacks earlier, and now we'll go and implement those. So every time the state of the call changes, like if we get connected or disconnected, or we recognize some text, our call automation service from Azure Communication Services will call back into our service and tell us that things have changed, either the call's been connected or that we've gotten a recognized event. So these come in as cloud events. I'll parse these cloud events and determine information about the call, like the call connection, and I'll grab a call media object, and then the phone ID, which is actually the phone number in this case that information came from. And then based on what type of event I've received, I'll handle it slightly differently. So if it's a call connected event I received, so this is when the call first gets connected when I hit answer on my phone, I will go and get a response from Azure OpenAI. So I'll ask it what it thinks the next thing it should say in that conversation is. I'll add that to my messages list, and then I will ask the call automation service to listen for a response from the user. If I receive a response, then we'll handle the recognize complete state here, which will first add the response to the list of messages. So we need to get the user's message into that list of messages. And then I'll do exactly the same thing. I'll ask GPT what it thinks the next message should be in that conversation. And then I will send that to our call automation service to generate text to speech and then wait for a response. And then that'll continue as I have a conversation, as our customer has a conversation with the bot, going back and forth, recognizing the event, asking GPT what it should respond with, responding, and then listening for another recognized event. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and implement those two squiggly methods that I haven't implemented yet. The first one is to go and talk to ChatGPT. So here I'm using the OpenAI SDK that I referenced earlier. I configured it with the endpoints and the key that I got from the portal. And then I'll create a chat completion options, which has our messages, as well as some information around the deployment that we want to access from OpenAI. We'll then ask it for a response, and this will be the next response within our message. I'll then implement here the say and recognize method, where I'm passing in that response, so the response from our OpenAI model, and then our phone number identifier and our media connection. I've selected here at the top the voice I want to use, and I can select any voice I want from Azure AI speech services. In this case, I'm selecting the Jenny Multilingual V2 Neural voice. And then I'll create a call media recognize speech options object, which has the target, so the person we want to send this to and that we want to listen to a response for. And then some information around A, the text that we want to add, and then B, how long we want to wait for a timeout at the end.
So Shawn, if I want to add a custom speech model, which is trained on my industry specific data, this is where I would do that as well, right?
That's right. So actually, you can configure it with any model that you've created within Azure AI Services. And when you're configuring the call automation service, you can attach whichever model you want via the endpoint that we saw from in the portal earlier. But we're almost ready to try this now. There's one last thing we have to do. And because we're hosting the service locally, we have to go and create a dev tunnel. And what a dev tunnel does is it allows us to talk from the call automation service sitting in Azure to our service that is sitting locally on our machine. Dev tunnels are a lot like ngrok. If you've used that tool before, it's almost the same thing. And so in this case, I've installed the dev tunnel tool. I'm going to host a new one with the parameter A, which means anonymous. That means I allow anonymous access. And with the port, in this case, 5083, which is the port that we're hosting this project on locally. So now that portal's created, I think we should be able to run this. Let's give it a try. So I'm going to hit F5 to run it, and our website will come up again. It's looking pretty good, I think, and we're almost ready. So we'll go and analyze our form, which is an image. We get our request back from Azure Document Intelligence, and then I'll put in a phone number. And hopefully this time we'll get further than it just calling us, because I've implemented all those callbacks from our call automation service. So I'll click Call Me, and now my phone is ringing. And I can answer the call and listen.
Hello, welcome to Kentucky. What's your name?
Shawn Henry.
Thank you, Shawn. What is the name of the physician that referred you?
Dr. Jane Smith.
Great. And can you briefly describe your symptoms for me, Shawn?
Yes, I have congestion and a sore throat.
I see. And could you please provide me with your past medical history? Have you ever been diagnosed with any medical conditions?
And just like that, I'm talking to any form that I can upload into Azure.
Wow, that was really neat. So all this data was collected by Azure AI Speech over the phone using Azure Communication Services call automation. So I'm thinking, Shawn, what can we do with this data now?
So now that we have all this data, there's a few things we can do. You mentioned Job Router earlier. So for example, when a customer is finished filling out that form, maybe you want to connect them to the real live receptionist or someone at the clinic. And so we can use something like Job Router to figure out who is the right live agent with the right credentials and capabilities to answer this call. And we can provide all sorts of rules and intelligence around that. The other thing I was thinking of we could do is maybe we want to send a summary of this conversation back to the user. And for that, we can use our new advanced messages capabilities to send a message through something like WhatsApp. And you can imagine that when the call finishes, we could ask our large language model to summarize it and then send that summary to the customer via WhatsApp. So let's take a look at how we might do that. In fact, it's really simple to try it out right from Azure Portal. So I'm back here in my Azure Communication Services resource. And if I scroll down, there's a new tab called Try Advanced Messaging. And this gives me a QR code. I can take this QR code and I can just point my phone at it, and I can take a picture of it, and that will take me right back into WhatsApp on my phone, and connect me with our demo instance inside Azure Communication Services. So if I scan the code and I type the message connect, and then the code it gives me, I'll be then connected. And that enables me to go and try the service out without doing all of the work to connect into WhatsApp business account.
Wait, is that all you need to do to start sending messages to WhatsApp from Azure?
Yeah, let's take a look. If I click over here onto send a template, it gives me on the left, it gives me a bunch of templates I can select from, and I can fill out all of the fields in that template. In this case, let's send one for your appointment reminder. So I'll put your name in here, and we can just click send at the bottom, and that will send it instantly to my WhatsApp account. So there, you can see it showed up on the right. And if I want to add that into my application, I can literally just copy paste the code here on the right and copy that into the application that I created just now. If I wanted to go further, I can provision a full WhatsApp for Business account by connecting a new channel and selecting WhatsApp, and then go through the full registration process. And then I can create my own templates or have conversations with my customers through WhatsApp business accounts.
Thank you, Shawn. That was amazing. It was very cool to see how step by step you could build a communication app which uses all of these great AI capabilities offered by Azure. To everyone who's watching, if you're interested to look at the code, it's available on GitHub repo, and we have mentioned the aka.ms link in the resources slide here. Additionally, we've also linked a YouTube episode on Microsoft Mechanics that showcases how you can build end-to-end customer engagement solution using Azure Communication Services and GPT-powered voice, video, and chat. And in general, if you want to learn more about Azure Communication Services, we've also placed our ACS docs link in this slide. And we can't wait to see what amazing things you build with these features. Thank you for watching.
Thanks, everyone.